19, we'll start our regularly scheduled board meeting of the Othello School District Board of Directors with the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to all of our guests tonight. And I will accept approval of the agenda if the board sees fit.
¿Habrá necesidad de traducción al español para alguien en esta noche? Gracias.
Thank you, Mike.
I move we approve the agenda.
Got a motion by Director Stevenson to approve,
Second.
second by Director Roylance.
Talk into your mic, please.
Oh, sorry. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We'll move on to item B1, public comment. I don't believe there is any request for public comment, so we'll move on to item B2, recognition of outstanding achievement of students and staff. So I just saying that this is getting to be pretty common. I expect it will continue to be common, but we want to honor the unified soccer team for the state championship 3 years in a row. Very good. So actually, I think the easiest thing for this is for the coach to come up and announce the names of the athletes and say whatever you want. There's a mic right there if you could grab, please.
Yes, sorry.
Well,
So
not for
YouTube
us,
can
but for
hear
the
it.
recording.
Check. Okay, I'm going to call up the kids, and I know a couple of them aren't here, but Sandra Montejano. Vincent Montejano. Enrique Vasquez isn't here. Aixia Duras isn't here. Mia Michael. Jose Tapia. Johnny Alfaro. Miguel Gonzalez isn't here, and Zahid is not here. So, third year in a row, I'm really proud of these kids. For the most part, it's been a big turnover of kids every year, which is nice. It's not the same kids over and over again. So it's enjoying to see these kids, new kids, get the excitement and joy of being on top. My assistant, which she's hiding over here, Vanessa, this was actually supposed to be her team coaching, and I said, well, get ready to coach, and she's like, no, you can do it. So, but you know, it's been enjoyable. We really appreciate the school district supporting these kids. You know, if it wasn't for you guys allowing us to do this, it wouldn't be possible. Like I said in the super student assembly, they better get a bigger gym because we're going to keep putting banners up. So, so our hope is to win basketball this next year, right, Vincent? We were close, but we're gonna get that hurdle. I have to get my groove. I got the soccer groove. We're gonna get the basketball groove. So, but again, thank you, school district and everybody that supports these kids. We really do appreciate everything that you guys have allowed these kids to do.
Thank you, and we'd love to get a picture if we could. You're welcome to stay, but if you'd like to leave, we understand. So we'll move on to item B3, board member discussions. And that will start with the legislative report, if there's anything to talk about.
I do not have anything at this time.
Okay. We'll move on to the next item, which is facilities discussion. It's just something that every board meeting, the board has an opportunity to bring up things. Maybe last time Jen talked about some things that she had heard in the community. Is there anything the board would like to bring up with regarding discussions on facilities tonight?
I know last week I also asked about the portable situation. I see it's coming up in the superintendent's report. For the next meeting, it would be nice to hear on the food services situation. I know you guys probably already got a great plan in place for next year for breakfast before the bell, but it would be nice to hear about that and also the facilities we've been working on.
All right. Good suggestion, Ken. Anything else from the board regarding facilities? Okay. So we'll move on to the annual school board evaluation. This is just kind of ongoing information in here, just to be able to be transparent, allow the community to see information on how the board comes to a conclusion of superintendent contracts and pay. So what was provided to us before was the same districts that we compared to last year. And the board might have to help me with this, but I think one of the questions that came up was how the districts were decided. I think that Tony kind of headed that up, looking for districts that were ones that we could compare to. My memory was it was maybe a student population from like 3,500 to 5,000, somewhere in there. Wanted to have a certain percentage of low-income students, free and reduced lunch. We wanted to be in the higher end there to be more comparable to our district. I believe there was some consideration to graduation rate as well. And so when those were all put together, those were the districts that Tony came up with, and then we used that as comparisons. One of the things that was easier for me, in the end, I wanted to know what's the cost to the district. So as I was looking through all the contracts, some of the superintendents have a base pay, but then they have money that's put into a retirement as well on top of that. Many of them, or about half of them, I guess, have the extra days. It's been our experience as a board in the past that if there are extra days offered, every extra day is used. And so that, in the end, is cost to the district as well. And so on the right, you can see kind of what the district cost definitely is for all these superintendents and what it could be with the two districts that offer performance pay, including us. And so that kind of gives a better idea of where we fall compared to these other districts. So I just, going into next meeting, that's when we'll do a formal evaluation. We'll have an executive session. We'll talk about some specifics. We'll talk to the superintendent about some specifics. And then we'll come out of that. We'll post and share a summary of all of our evaluative processes through the year. And then that's when the board decides on a contract extension at that time. So this is kind of for the board as well to look at and when they're thinking about the contract extension. And then one of the things I think that I'd like to clarify, because I've heard some confusion, it feels like, in the community, is regarding the bonus, the contract extension bonus. I've heard some people refer to it as a raise. So just to clarify that, the base salary for our superintendent is the lowest of any base salaries other than Grandview. So it's next to lowest. The $25,000 extension is only if the board says, we'd like to add that third year onto your contract so there's 3 years left. At any time if the board said, we're not extending the contract, you can serve out your 2 years and that's all the service we would like from you, then that bonus is not added from that year on. So it only happens when the board makes a decision to extend that contract to that third year. So just to clarify for the board, and I think the board understands it pretty well, but also for the community. So, is there anything that any questions the board has about this?
Not a question, but I appreciate how simple this is. I know that Tony in the past had made a spreadsheet which was exhaustive and very extensive, but it was multiple pages. It was It was intense. So this is great just to have it all together instead of having to scroll up through multiple pages and things. So this is really appreciated.
One of the things I left out was the things that are the same for every district. 12 sick days, for instance. All superintendents had the same thing, 12 sick days. And so this was really the items in here, what differ from district to district. Okay. If there's no questions on that, we're going to move on to the next item. Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead. Jen knew that. She didn't correct me. Thank you. Annual school board evaluation, survey questions review. I jumped ahead because I think I know the answer to this one. One of the things we talked about, we were going to go through and try to reduce the amount of questions we had in our annual school board self-evaluation because we felt that it was pretty extensive. Did any board members have a chance to go through and whittle those down? I didn't.
I wasn't sure what it was about. I missed the last meeting, so.
So the idea was to try to
Workshop.
bring these down to 30, right? Was that what we decided?
Yes, right now we have 61.
Yeah, so this is for next year's retreat, so it's not in a big hurry, but it looks like we'll just leave this in board discussions for next board meeting. And so if we see ones that, I would say that we think we're doing well on, and maybe we don't need to leave in there, we try to get down to the ones that we really need to work on as a board. Okay? Any other discussion about that, or any discussions we might have missed in the agenda? Right, we'll move on to our student representative report. It's singular.
Yeah, unfortunately. All right, so I don't really have that much to report about the school itself. The finals are wrapping up. We have one final period tomorrow, and that's it. We're just ready for summer. The upperclassmen are working, and the underclassmen get to sleep in, so they're all excited about all of that. So I was unable to attend Project Bridges. There was some scheduling issues, and I just couldn't get out of it. But Isabella and Jen said it was a success. There was a lot of people, and that it went well. So that's awesome. I'm really excited for that. And that's really all I got.
All right. I agree. I thought Project Bridges was good. It was informative, and the kids, there's some projects that the kids really worked hard on. They showed there.
Yeah, and then, I have one more thing. I talked to some of the student reps that were at the thing, and I told them, I was like, hey, I'm just going to let you know, like, that training is not what it's going to be about. We're doing another training, and I would encourage you to attend the next one, because it's not all it's going to be revised. So I have some bites about that, but I will, as soon as I have more information about what it is, I will give it out to them.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Does the board want to discuss maybe some definite dates? Or we still want to just hold off and talk about this again in August?
I don't think that most of the school schedules and calendars are like solidified, so we kind of need to see what's happening with OHS and DOHS's schedules before I think we plan dates and then end up having to change them anyways, because it's the night of some other big thing or something.
Sure. And I don't remember, did we decide to put something in board discussions on a future board meeting for that? I'm not sure we did, but probably a good idea to do it.
That's probably a good idea.
We did. Okay, which meeting was it? 1st September. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, any other questions for the student rep? All right. We'll move on to item C1, required approvals.
I move that we approve the required approvals.
Been a motion by Director Stevenson to approve,
Second.
second by Director Garza. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. And then next item is superintendent informational items. 2 items in there. One was the request from Director Johnson last meeting about the modular buildings, and then also some information about the general fund balance. That was also response to a question about the fact that we have more revenue than anticipated. So does the board have any questions for clarification on those items?
So yes, I do. The modular buildings, I know that there's a contingency plan at each campus. Who came up with the contingency plan? I know that the report is from Greg Foltz, but did the principals come up with those contingency plans, or was that Greg?
Absolutely, the principals are guided by Pete, and he actually asked all the principals what the contingency plan would be, and it was their input that led to this plan.
Okay. And then the Wahidas portable is just next to where the other portables currently are, correct?
Greg, can you answer that question, Greg?
No? There we go. Just to the south of the east portable.
So all in a row.
No, not in a row. You have the two that are south of the building, and then south of that will be the next one on the east side.
Okay.
We can't go any more to the east because of easement.
Use your mic, please.
Sorry.
Can't talk with his hands and use his mic at the same time.
For those hand talkers. And then Hiawatha is just where the other portable was in the past, just in the back where it's already paved.
Yes, on that pavement.
And then where's Ludicaga's plan?
Ludicag will be removing the single portable just to the
Okay.
east of the gym and installing a double in its
Okay.
place.
Just geographic information. Thank you.
Anything else? No other question on the portables, or do you, Ken?
It's great to see that there's a plan in place for contingencies. Hopefully not having to ever be used, but it's great to know there's a plan instead of a disaster plan at the end. Thank you.
I do have a question regarding the general fund balance, just a little clarification for the extra revenue. So I understand that our enrollment's up 60 students compared to this time last year, but we'd budgeted for an increase in students, I believe. Did we just budget for less of an increase in students?
So we did budget for an increase. The budget, and so yeah, basically the budgeted increase wasn't as much as we're at. But when you're looking at that graph, it's actuals, right? So it's not budget. So actually we're at 60 students more than we were last year, which is why there's that big gap. So it's not factoring in the budget, basically, because the budget isn't factored into that graph on a month-by-month basis. It's just the actuals over time. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, I
Okay.
understand what you're saying.
But you keep referring to that graph that's not in here. What graph
No.
are you referring to? I'm sorry.
It was the fund balance graph that was in last
Okay.
meeting's packet, which prompted the question.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
Ken asked the question, I think, because the graph showed like 3.2 million more.
Yeah, there was
whatever
a
it
big gap.
Okay.
From
I understand.
actual, not from budgeted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, I
Yep.
believe it also had in there at the beginning of the report that we're actually down about 62 or 64 students from,
Yeah, the budget was high, and budget's always kind of a little bit of a guesstimate, but yeah, so the budget was a little bit high. As far as basic ed students, our special ed students are actually higher than budget. So we have some higher categories, some lower categories, and they all kind of commingle.
how's that affect the state reimbursement by the end of the year with where we're actually down
Yeah.
60 students?
So essentially, so what happens from September to December is you get paid based on your budget. And then in January, the state, adjusts to the actual average enrollment. And so basically you got more money each month, September through December, and then the balance of the year, January through August, you get slightly less to kind of make up the difference and it's just,
Okay.
it's spread out over those months.
Okay, thank you.
It seems like the $1,400 per student increase had a really big effect, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Actually.
because that's on your total enrollment.
Yeah.
So it's not just on the, 60 students, it's on your total enrollment.
Thank you for that. Any other questions with any of the superintendent informational items? Okay. We're going to move on to item D1, and that would be the monitoring report for ENS 1.
We have Pete's going to be presenting on ENS 1, please.
All right, good evening. Exciting opportunity to share the progress of our students and staff, celebrating progress and growth across the system, and just like to remind the community and the board about all the hard work that our teachers and students do day to day, and it's a good opportunity to recognize and celebrate that. Want to take the opportunity to remind folks about the commitment that we've made about the vision for our system, and also to take a chance to have the board reflect on that we set some aggressive goals, and that it's our responsibility to set those and then to monitor and adjust. So there will be some acceleration and some realignment as we bring the scorecard back to the board in the next several weeks. And all of this is done in the interest of recognizing and celebrating progress of the system. Now, this idea about reasonable progress and what we do and how we do it, I certainly want to recognize the work being done by our principals and teachers, working in a coherent way, engaging in a continuous cycle of improvement, which is part of our responsibility and what we're going to share with you tonight. Participating in professional learning. I think there's a perception out there that, after tomorrow, teachers have the summer off, but I can tell you quite clearly that they'll be working hard for the next several weeks. Some will stick around for summer school, and then they'll come back in early August. Kinder readiness, and we certainly recognize the importance of that initiative in our system, because graduation and progress does not start in 9th grade. We know it begins much earlier than that. And then as part of our instructional vision, ensuring accessibility for all of the students in our system. And I think that comes in the form of recognizing persistent achievement gaps amongst some of our population. The next slide is the presentation of the scorecard data itself. Again, that's just a snip of that document that you have all had access to for several months. I think what we could note in the first row is that around the kinder readiness assessment, we're holding strong. 91% of the OSD students are ready for kinder based on that assessment. Certainly established an aggressive goal at 99%, but excited about that number and the increased opportunities that we created this year by increasing the number of slots, and interested in certainly sustaining and perhaps expanding that program. The next two columns are, I think, an interesting way to look at the data. Not common in many districts, but this is really a systems perspective. And what you'll note there in those two rows, SBA performance on ELA and in math, and the performance at 36 and 35%, so relatively flat. That's a combination of 3rd through 8th grade and 10th grade. So we take all of that state performance and we put all those together. We'll share some pockets of excellence with you here in just a bit, but I did want you to understand that that's all students in our system in those tested grades. And the gaps continue to be persistent. The next piece that around science assessment, that data was not in, so unable to provide that for the board tonight in a complete fashion, and we have delayed the world language and the physical fitness assessment until next year, and so that's been status quo all along. We knew that data would not be present. The next two columns around effect size, I think, are unique to the Othello School District as well, and that's based on the research and the commitment that we've made to the introduction of visible learning from John Hattie and calculating. It really is all about growth. We set some pretty aggressive targets there, and again, those are 3rd through 8th grade students. We did not include 10th, as there's a gap in the assessment year in 9th grade. We set an aggressive target of 0.40, and I want to give you a bit of a history on how that's calculated. So you need 2 assessments to determine effect size. We use the Smarter Balanced Assessment, and we use just a chunk of it, Claim 1 in ELA and in math. You find the average for that assessment and then the standard deviation for each of those assessments. You subtract test 2 from test 1 to establish the growth, and that's how you get effect size. So our first year calculating it, And I think we're going to want to come back and communicate with Dr. Hurst and the system about, how do we feel about that score? What's an appropriate goal to set? But I think exciting that we were able to track it and to monitor it. I think it's unique to schools in Washington, and I haven't seen other folks doing it. It's quite an interesting way to report on it. And so we're learning more about that.
Pete, just
Yes.
to confirm, a 0.4 is a year's worth of growth, is that correct?
That's what Hattie's research indicates. Yep, a year's worth of
Okay.
growth in a year's time.
Okay, thank you.
Back to that comment, I'm not going to share with you tonight individual teacher data. We'll take it down to the grade team level, but certainly we can dig down a little bit deeper and find teachers that are having a dramatic impact on student achievement. So that could be perhaps shared in a different setting, but we're able to do that. Yep. So the next slide, I think we want to acknowledge initially where we're struggling, and it's those persistent gaps in math and in ELA. And this is just talking about case 6 here. So what are we doing? Teacher clarity plays a significant role in both areas and in all areas, and that's our teachers identifying the standards that are important for our students to learn, and then letting students know what success looks like. Here's what a successful experience looks like in 3rd grade on this particular math activity. So our teachers are working hard. That's a lot of work to put those things together and to go through that training, and so we continue to push on that really important lever. We adopted Wonders just last year, so it was our first year for our teachers to have experience with that curriculum, and now they're taking the next step, which is identifying the ELA priority standards and really getting a coherent model, K6, which ties right up with teacher clarity. Some really hard work being led by Jennifer Garza and John Wiseman around that work with a group of teachers that represent the system. The next piece, the Teacher Development Group, that's a entity that we partnered with. We call them TDG. They came in particularly in 6th grade to work with our math teachers. And there's some exciting results around math that we'll share with you here in a moment. And we're expanding that process up to our high school and down to some of our primary grades with TDG. We're really excited about that work and been well received and reviewed by the teachers. The last item on there is Instructional Specialist. You may have noted some additional postings across the district in the last couple weeks. We were able to post 7 new positions based on some budget expertise that Jeanette was able to provide to us. And so we're excited about the certificated expert small group instruction and support we can deliver K-3 for the next few years. That's totally related to class size reduction funding, and if we have a facility and a space for those folks, we'll certainly find a home for them. But in the meantime, we get to access their expertise and use them with our K-3 students. So I know the principals were particularly excited about that resource that's coming their way. Some successes that we'd like to call out and some pockets of excellence across the district. Hiawatha 4th grade math, 53% of their students were at standard, just under the state average. So really excited about the hard work happening there. Wahida's 5th grade math, 53%, just exceeding the state average in math. Wahida's 3rd through 6th grade, so again, a combination of all ELL students at that site. 34% of their students met standard in math, more than double the state average. And Wahida's 3rd through 6th ELL students again, in ELA, exceeded the state average again. So excited about that progress for that particular group of students. In the school district itself, 6th grade, in ELA, 35% is the number that we hit. The 4-year trend had been 30%, and then wanted to recognize Wahidas and Scootney for certainly exceeding the 4-year trend and showing nearly double-digit growth at Scootney and 16 points of growth at Wahidas beyond what the 4-year trend had been in the OSD. 6th grade math, 31%, so again, an uptick of just above 5% for the district. And Wahidas, 48% of their students met standard in math in 6th grade, which is double the 4-year trend. So certainly there are other pockets of excellence around our system, but we really wanted to recognize those folks and those teams for some outstanding achievement. The next slide is around 7-8. Again, back with that theme of what areas are we struggling in. This is just two ways to look at the same information that tells you that performance has been flat at McFarland for the last 5 years. And its idea of addressing, if we had layered the state in here, you could certainly identify the gap. The intent of this image was just to share that the work there continues to be very consistent. We sort of know what's going to happen there year to year. What are we doing? Some changes coming to McFarland over the next school year. Introduction of a turnaround model in leadership. So that will be a significant change for the system. We've also had an increase in certificated staff. I think the recruiting efforts and the improvement in the applicant pool across the state of Washington. This last year we had 7 teachers in core areas that were long-term subs. We think we're going to be right around 2 and have been able to be more selective in assigning those folks. There's some really good work going around ELA instructional frameworks for the middle school. And there's an explicit instruction model that's having tremendous success in the Sunnyside and Granger school districts. And Jessica Shank has been leading some work in partnership with that school district. And so we'll be piloting some of their resources and initiatives and looking for some movement around that flat line related to math. This last school year, we do want to recognize the adjustment and focus to a single prep, allowing teachers to focus on a particular content area. And also the work with the teacher development group that was mentioned earlier, the math staff in particular, that was well received and well implemented at McFarland. 9-12, where are we struggling? We call out math. What we've discovered over the last 2 years is this difficult trend that if you are a traditional track student and you take algebra in 9th grade and geometry in 10th, this year only 6% of those students met standard on the math SBA. So we can say with a high degree of certainty that if you take algebra in 9th grade at Othello High School, move into geometry in 10th, and at the end of 10th grade, take that assessment. This year, 94% of those students did not pass that test. Now, the interesting thing to note about that is that the SBA was written as an Algebra 2 test. Those students in that track would not have been through Algebra 2. The state has determined that we give that test in 10th grade to give students an additional opportunity to pass. So they have multiple chances, other avenues to get to graduation. So this is an issue across the state. The average in the state of Washington for last year was just above 40%. So we know it's an issue, and it's something that we want to talk about that trickles down to 8th grade and to the middle school, and this idea about is algebra for all something that we want to consider? How do we accelerate their experience and their expertise in math so that we can keep them on a college-going track, which is you're probably going to take algebra in the 8th grade and geometry in 10th, and those kids are doing quite well and passing the state assessment. And we'll share some of that here in a second. The other things that we're doing to address this, again, back to the teacher clarity and the coherence that's for all of the teachers in our system. And then Agile Minds is a program that the state is offering certain districts. We apply for a grant each year, and for the last few years we've been able to secure that grant. It pays for specific training and resources for teachers to teach a partnered algebra course, and the data that Mr. Vergara shared with me that would get down to the teacher level that wouldn't be shared here is quite promising. So excited about the work that's happening with Agile Minds as it relates to algebra. The next slide ties into the one above. So if you are at OHS and you get into Algebra 2 and pre-calc as a 10th grader, 65% of those kids met standard on the SBA, which is well above the state average. And now it's a matter of thinking about a coherent way to get more kids to have that experience. We also know that this year DOHS and OHS implemented after-school intervention programs. And so we're excited about the development of that program and what it might mean for student performance. Mr. Vergara this year implemented a credit retrieval intervention so that it's in the arena of standards-based grading, meaning you don't just get a credit when you get to the end of the semester, that if you get to it's more about demonstrating proficiency with the standards. So if we get some kids who have struggled along the way and they may not earn a passing grade at the semester, they have a 3-week window at the start of the next semester to go back and demonstrate proficiency and earn that credit. So in essence, they're going to double up for that 3 or 4 week window, demonstrate to the teachers that they've earned the credit. It allows us to them to develop this credit nest egg and this idea that I can get to graduation because I'm earning credits along the way. You get fewer kids who are in the situation of taking English 10 and English 9 as sophomores because they failed English 9. So a really exciting opportunity for our students and high participation for students who needed that support. And then I wanted to remind the board about the really good work going on around the tiered supports, particularly at DOHS, but understanding that that foundational layer at Othello High School is where it all starts for our kids. So that's something that we're really excited about. We have interviewed and hope to staff that position here in the next few days or next week, and excited about the opportunities that that will provide for our secondary students. And so again, I just appreciate the opportunity to share evidence demonstrating reasonable progress across the system. These are aggressive and ambitious goals, but I don't think we'd set them any other way. And certainly our supporting initiatives, plans, and strategies that we were able to share with you this evening and throughout the year. It's always exciting to share and highlight the hard work of our students and staff. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Now's an opportunity for questions from the board.
I have one question. So you're very specific about talking about 7th and 8th grade long-term subs, having less long-term subs in those. Is that also a focus for 9, 12, and K-6?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a focus across the system. Sandra does an excellent job of tracking who those folks are, and there's actually a change in the state of Washington next year. We'll be pursuing conditional certification. So it's something the district has to seek out, and that employee then has 2 years to get certified. We have some folks in our system that for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years have sort of been hanging on because we know the applicant pool isn't as deep, and some spaces we just couldn't fill. But a stronger applicant pool this year, and this movement towards a more coherent system around conditional certification, it's a K-12 experience. We're certainly looking at it K-12.
So can you explain more about the conditional certification?
So conditional certification just basically means that you're employed as a teacher based on conditions, so your experience or education. So if you are in a bachelor's program towards the educator pathway, you would qualify for a conditional certificate.
Okay, so if you're in a program.
Correct. You'd have to be in a program.
What happens if you've completed the program, but the certification through the state is the difficulty?
You would still qualify for a conditional certificate. Again, you would have 2 years that you're on that conditional certificate.
So they're conditionally certificated.
To teach in the state of Washington.
And have you discussed how will that, long-term subs are paid a different way than certificated, and years of experience count. So has that come into effect for the contract?
Yeah, so they will get years of experience on the salary schedule with a conditional certificate.
But they can only be conditional for 2 years?
Correct.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, we'll be getting our survey soon to evaluate this policy as well. One of the reasons that we do the final superintendent evaluation at the end of June is because that's when we've gotten all of our information in, and so it can all come to a culmination at the end there. All right, so we'll move on then to item D2, board approval of monitoring response documents. Those are ENS 2 and ENS 3 that we monitored at the last board meeting. Alex?
Are you looking for someone to approve that? Do we have to
Yes,
accept that?
Well,
Oh, okay.
for acceptance, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, it would be, okay. I guess it would be an approval in that we're approving it, that it's written in the way we talked about it as a board and how we wanted it to look.
Okay,
And
I see.
so it is really an approval, so we'll vote
Okay.
to put this in a permanent record essentially. So I will accept a motion for that.
I'd like to motion that we accept the final documents as written for ends 2 and 3, that they be accepted as written.
Then a motion to approve.
Approved, yes.
Then a motion to approve by Director Garza,
Second.
second by Director Johnson. Any more discussion on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. And in policy 2, or policy review, you'll see ends 2 and ends 3. And then also EL 12 is in there. The board requested that stay in there, and there is a recommended revision there. So I guess the first question was, there was no recommendation submitted for changes to ends 2 and ends 3? And if that's still the case, then that would just be left alone, the same for next year. But if there is a motion or recommendation for EL 12, we can discuss that.
So is this your recommendation, Jen? Is this?
Rob actually wrote this,
Okay.
but the wording was what I wanted, I guess. What I was getting at.
So where will these written expectations be outlined, Rob?
That would go to the superintendent.
Okay.
Yeah. That would, the board would just be saying there's expectation that there will be written expectations and kind of specific, I think, trying to capture what it was that Jen was talking about on not just expectations for the proper
Acceptable.
use, acceptable use, but also kind of a minimum use, but, so if the board thinks that that captures what that desire was, I think, then, you can move to approve that.
Do we need Chris's interpretation before we?
That would be
Can I ask Chris
proper
for-
thing to ask for,
Can I
yes.
ask Chris for his interpretation of that sentence?
So, you want to read it, Jen, just to?
Yes, so the whole thing or just the part 2? How
Part
about?
2 is the only thing that's changing.
Okay.
I'm fine with that, but it's,
So part 2, a failure to establish written expectations for use of technology by staff and students. These written expectations will not only define acceptable use, but will also clarify the minimum expectations of district staff in teaching and utilizing the technology that the district has made available to them in order to support students as 21st century learners.
I think it goes back to conversations that you and I have had, Jen, just about use of technology. I think one of the things we talked about is Chromebook use, but I think in our conversations, we also talked about other uses or other pieces of technology. If I look at this just around our conversation and Chromebook use, that there's an expectation around a minimum use of those Chromebooks across the system, K through 12. And it's not just minimum use, but it's also written down in our policies, so written expectations. So it's based on our past conversations.
and is the board feeling that it's all technology? Are we just talking about Chromebooks here? What would be the?
I think we want all technology. I don't think we just want just Google. I know that Microsoft is out there and some of the classroom abilities to use and those kinds of things. For me, it's all technology.
Well, it says technology system, so it's not.
I
Right.
think one of the things we talked about as well, I mean, we look at our PBL, we look at STEM and STEAM, that's technology use as well. So I think as we move forward and looking at how we're gathering evidence, that we have to consider those pieces as well across the system. So
Right, and
not
I
just
think-
Chromebooks, but everything.
Definitely. I think through some of our conversations, because my concern was always, how do you measure use of technology? And so it does sound like there are a couple of options on being able to have written expectations and to be able to monitor those and give that information to us, both as the board and to our community.
So one thing that I would say as I look at this, my interpretation of this would be that we're not asking the superintendent to prove that they're being used in that way, but to make sure that there are written expectations established. Now, we would hope that also they're being held to that expectation. But all we're asking for in this policy is that there are written expectations, not only for the acceptable use, but also for utilization in general, right? So one thing I want the board to keep in mind, that's what this really is just hitting on, that there's expectations written. And I think before, the written expectations were more about acceptable use, right? And that's what brought this discussion to the table at first.
I know you had a concern, Jen, at one point where there was a teacher, I believe, that didn't use it, that wouldn't allow them to use it or something.
Just not, I don't know if that quite wording is correct, but just, it wasn't being used. And I've had conversations with multiple different teachers about, some people are more adept and skilled at using technology, including in my own home. I sometimes have to ask my children, how do I do this on my phone? That's just an inherent part of children that are raised with technology and those of us that aren't. So,
Well, I don't know if it's too late for tonight or not, Rob, and I apologize for not getting this to you sooner, but I know I've read this in a couple of meetings we had and stuff. I don't know if this sentence can be incorporated to that or if it even fits in or not, but I'd like to see something to the effect of, the superintendent shall not cause or allow any teacher to limit the use of technology in the classroom when it could be reasonably applied. I think, and that came to me when Jen said that they wouldn't let the kids use it or something. Like she says, I may be misquoting her, but shall not cause or allow any teacher to limit the use of technology in the classroom when it could be reasonably applied. I don't know if that can be incorporated into the sentence, if it would be of any use or not. I don't know if we can table this and get this to you, or maybe throw our minds around it again, see if it enhances this in any way.
right.
Like I said, I apologize.
I think that sounds good.
I made a quick
I'd be
trip.
fine with that because we're already talking about, this is just written expectations, and then we're actually talking about usage on top of written expectations. So,
So we're narrowing that for the superintendent. We're being more defined and specific about it. Board absolutely has the right to do that if they wish. You're really clear about the wording of it. I don't know why it couldn't be talked about and added in tonight, and the board
Okay.
discuss it. If the board's okay with that. We don't have to necessarily wait till next meeting to talk about it again.
right, where do you think that would best fit in with this now?
I think it would help with clarifying the minimum expectation of district staff. The usage of it, I think it would go in where you can't limit. I mean, I think we're gonna eventually, there's gonna be some kids that are gonna, well, I shouldn't say think they're smarter than the teacher, but they're gonna say, I could do this on Google even though you think it's not there or whatever. And if there's a kid that can do that a teacher doesn't say, oh, no, you can't, and you're not gonna do it just because I say you can't. I think it falls within, when it can be reasonably applied, that a teacher doesn't limit the student from saying, when it can be done, to say, oh, no, you're not. And I think that would behoove the district, it would behoove the investment we've made, to get the utilization out of these apparatuses.
I would suggest that wording maybe just goes in number 3, right after number 2. And you,
And
obviously,
then 3, 4, and 5 become 4, 5, and 6, is that what you're saying?
unless the board would like to change or eliminate one of those, yes, they would just move down in that case. Seems like
Yes.
an appropriate spot. First, you talk about the written expectations, and then you're gonna go into expectation that the superintendent isn't gonna let it happen. But the heading, therefore, the superintendent shall not cause or allow, is in there. What comes after that, Tony? And Talia, would you be able to put this in as a number 3 for us, so we could look at it? Right now? If you could, I don't know. we're ahead of time anyways in our meeting, if the board's okay with doing that.
Well, and getting 12, EL 12 done and off would be awesome too. It's been there forever. I
seem
know,
weird
it's
not
my
seeing
fault.
it.
I know. What will we do without 12 there? No.
No, 3 would be a new one, so it would read, any teacher to limit the use of technology in the classroom when it could be reasonably applied. Right, could be, shall not cause or allow. Yeah, we'd have to, that's right, a failure to allow. No, allow's already in there. Yeah, to keep with the same format. So it needs to start with a failure too, Mike.
Could we just add it after we're
What about,
clarifying the minimum expectation of district staff in teaching and utilizing the technology, and then go into that? As well as,
we could, the reason I was recommending we did a separate one, because that one really talks about written expectations, where this one talks about not allowing a teacher to not follow the written expectations, right? That's what kind of it seems like to me. But if you said a failure to prevent any teacher from limiting the use, would that be?
It sounds like you're preventing the teacher instead of the teacher preventing the student. I think that was the intent.
Well, you're saying prevent any teacher from limiting the use, so
Okay,
it
you're
kinda,
right. Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it's a great,
Phrasing, we could always
Yeah.
fix that later on.
sounds like it's coming back next.
Next 12.
I'll work on it. But I didn't, if we're gonna start with a failure, it'd have to be worded different.
So, suggestion, board could approve this for now, as is written, and then that could also be added later as an additional bullet
If we're
item.
going to go through all of this, let's just make it perfect the first time instead of modifying and then modifying again. So, because that's why we've kept it in here for so long. Can we just put it in and then fix, and then we'll look at the wording for next time and tweak the wording for next time, even though we know that the wording won't be quite correct.
So you requested just to add it as number 3 for now,
Yes,
and then it will be discussed, it will be written, but discussed again next board meeting?
right. 'Cause sometimes I have to see it to go, yeah, that doesn't work. We need to change it to this, so.
Okay. Yep.
So as I'm listening to you speak about this, it sounds very specific to Chromebooks. But in our discussion, we said that this really should be toward any technology that's going to prepare our students to be 21st century learners. So are we being very specific around Chromebooks, or is that my?
Do you know what, that might, that's basically saying, pull out your iPhones and look at what you want. So, I don't know. That's a
The
great
only reason I asked that
thought.
question, because as I interpret it, I'm looking at all types of technology, so we would bring other evidence for the district to consider. So it wouldn't just be Chromebooks.
What is it about that verbiage that makes you think it's just Chromebooks?
Just listening to the conversation, it just appears that maybe I'm wrong.
I know that,
wasn't thinking just Chromebooks
I
myself,
wasn't-
I don't know what the rest of the board was.
right, I wasn't either. I mean, I know that there are teachers that say, pull out your phones. I know you have, I mean, there's amazing technology, and most students have phones, not everyone. And that depends upon the teacher whether they're going to allow that in their class or not, so.
Okay, I just wanted to get clarity around the technology piece.
I think, for me, technology is very broad.
Got it?
just adding the simple word all in between utilizing and the on 2A. Teaching and utilizing all the technology.
I purposely didn't, I had all in there at first. I changed it to the, because I thought some technology might not be necessarily appropriate for a certain teacher to utilize because of the content of their instruction, but might be for others, so that I didn't put all because I didn't want necessarily to think it applied to every teacher, every technology we have. That was my thought process there, but again, it all depends on Chris's interpretation of it in the end.
Because
Okay,
there's
a
technology
question.
also that the district hasn't provided. We don't want to disallow technology that is brought in that's not district provided.
You say we don't want to allow,
We don't want
Using-
to disallow.
Right.
I know that sounds backwards. I'm saying that in the double negative, but,
what, I'm kind of going backwards a little bit on this, but what if we said a failure to establish and enforce? Would that cover both? And then we don't have to add another item? Establish and enforce written expectation, then we're increasing the expectation that not only the written expectations are established, but then the superintendent has to make sure it's being followed and show us proof that it's being followed. Would that take the place of the one that you're recommending, Mike?
I like that.
So just
No,
that
sounds good.
verbiage change or addition, to establish and enforce. Is the board okay with the technology rather than all technology like Ken recommended, or do they want it changed to all technology?
If you put all technology under 2 and not under A, I would be fine with all under 2 because that's just saying all technology in general. I feel like specifically where Ken suggested under A, because that, to me, defines only technology that the district has provided. There's plenty of technology out there that we all have that is not district provided.
So do you think then that the superintendent has to have written expectations of technology that they may not know that might come from outside the district?
That's a good one. I don't know, that's a hard one.
Like I said, in the end, it comes down to interpretation by the superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
My suggestion would just be to add establish and enforce after establish, and maybe approve as a first reading, and then come back and have the chance for Dr. Hurst to really think about his interpretation of it written like that, and share with that at next board meeting for a final approval, possibly.
Yes.
I have a quick question. Would you be putting all technology on 2 as well as the other places?
I think right now the suggestion was just to not put all
Not put all.
at this point, and until we hear the interpretation of Dr. Hurst. Is that accurate? Yeah, for now, I think we're getting a little hung up on the all, and so we're trying to wait and
Just move forward at some point.
talk
Right.
about it maybe next time if we need to.
Okay.
They're good suggestions. It's all about the interpretation. Okay, so maybe a motion.
I like your suggestion.
Do we have to move because we're not doing anything?
I think that it would be smart to make a motion for a first reading on this with that change.
I move that we approve the first reading with the modifications we've discussed.
Been a motion by Director Stevenson to approve first reading for modifications to EL 12 as written, with the inclusion of and enforce after to establish in item 2. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Director Garza. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. So that'll be in for final reading next board meeting, correct? No motion for ends 2 or ends 3, so they will remain unchanged. No need for executive session tonight. We'll move on to item G1, upcoming events. I heard the last day of school is tomorrow. I don't know if you guys were aware of that. And then June 24th, we will have an executive session for the superintendent evaluation at 6 o'clock. And then a regular board meeting following that, and part of that board meeting will be the preliminary budget presentation as well. Any upcoming events? The obvious ones I've missed? Okay. And please complete the Survey Monkey for the board self-evaluation. Okay, all 6 are in. The agenda was well planned to focus on the real work of the board. 5 said commendable. The board followed its agenda and did not allow itself to get sidetracked. 5 said commendable, 1 said good. The board's deliberations and decision-making processes were public. 5 said commendable. All board members participated in discussion. No one dominated. 5 said commendable. Sorry, 4 said commendable. I was saying 5. It was 6 for those. Sorry, I can't see that column on mine. So, anyways, you get what I mean. On this one, 4 said commendable, 1 said good, 1 said satisfactory. Members listened attentively, avoiding side conversations. 6 said commendable. On to governance principles review. Board actions occurred at a policy level rather than an operational level. 6 said yes. The board agenda referenced policy about each topic that was discussed. 6 said yes. The board chair helped the board efficiently conduct its meetings. 6 said yes. The board supported the superintendent in a reasonable interpretation of its policies. 6 said yes. Under new or modified policies, did the board write a new or modified policy or modify an existing policy? Yes. The board started with a broad statement, became more detailed in a logical and disciplined sequence. I said not applicable because we didn't write a new one. Thought that was going to be only if we wrote new ones, right?
I
New or
suggest
modified.
because we specifically asked him on the modification.
I think that the next question applies. But starting with a broad statement would be if you started a new policy, right? Rather than modifying. Did we talk about that? I might have it wrong. I know it's the first time we talked about
I
it.
think it's 5 versus 1.
Okay, sounds like it. And the board asked the superintendent to provide a reasonable interpretation of the policy. And 6 said yes. Overall, 6 said it was a commendable meeting. Well done. Business is concluded. Meeting is adjourned.